So a botnet is really a collection of malware. It's any Trojan virus or worm propagated through any type of distribution method, spam, phishing, doesn't matter. And it's used to perform whatever function the attacker wants to perform. If the attacker wants to send out spam, it's used to perform that. If the attacker wants to rent the botnet out, it's used to do that. If they want to attack other spammers for infringing on their territory, it could be used to do that. Initial compromise are the same thing you see for all malware. Web downloads, email attachments, instant messaging attachments, which you probably see less of now. ICQ is pretty dead and gone. But, I mean, you still probably see stuff like this in terms of instant messaging with Twitter. Twitter has direct messages, and you might be getting instant messages with malicious links in that vector. So, drilling down into a couple of specific pieces of malware. Conficker, we thought about removing this, but Conficker is super cool because it's been around for the better part of a decade. It first cropped up with unpatched Windows and XP systems, and it's been floating around in often varied forms for forever. It disables certain Windows services like Update to keep itself hidden to a kind of a limited degree, but still hidden enough. And it attaches itself to certain processes, so you can't examine it in the process manager, which when Conficker came out was one of the more popular ways to examine if malware was actually running on a system. One of its goals, one of the original goals anyway, was to pop up demanding $50 to get your machine back, and it's been used for spam and DDoS. And in 2015, last year, Conficker was actually found on a nuclear reactor test site, and it still accounts for a decent amount of botnet traffic, even this year. So the thing you need to remember about malware is a lot of it never dies, because a lot of systems, and especially in a lot of other parts of the world, are just never getting patched, never getting maintained, and they're still on. So there'll be bots until their CPUs die. So another type of malware is embedded systems malware. It's probably the coolest malware because it lets you actually sabotage stuff. The idea behind embedded systems is that there's something called a program logic controller that runs an operating system called SCADA. And SCADA systems are like special operating systems for anything that runs robots building cars to a centrifuge spinning uranium hexafluoride gas to make enriched uranium for Iran. Now, Stuxnet wormed its way in, not on the internet, but just on a series of USB thumbsticks, and eventually found its way into those centrifuges. Now, not only did Stuxnet get in there undetected, but it also installed itself undetected and would cause the centrifuges to spin so fast they were basically breaking themselves. And it would also, which is a really elegant touch I might add, it would display to the operators that the centrifuges were just spinning just fine. And you can't really tell how fast a centrifuge is spinning, I guess, because it's like thousands and thousands of rotations per minute. So it's the first known malware deployed for physical sabotage. It was kind of theoretical before, but now it's not. And you see embedded systems malware floating around a decent amount now. Just recently we had Iranian hackers that were indicted for an attempt to hack the industrial control systems at a dam. And yeah, it's going to be with us because our computers run our machinery. So Flame is interesting because it's actually, well, what it isn't interesting, but its attack method is. Really, it's a remote access Trojan that allows people to spy on one another. And that in and of itself isn't particularly groundbreaking. But the way it attacked its targets was really neat because it used something called a cryptographic collision attack. And the idea behind that is that hashes passed back and forth between machines, if you can match those hashes that are used to like verify your encryption sessions and things like that, you can actually break into encryption sessions and establish authorized access if you are advanced enough and if you can time it right. Now, that's a very hard thing to do mathematically because encryption is pretty strong, but somebody figured out how to do it. It was used in surveillance in various parts of the Middle East, has a really focused, narrowly targeted use set, but is still interesting just because the attack method was so advanced. So the one piece of or type of malware that everybody's probably heard of and may have been attacked by at this point is banking Trojans. New variants of Zeus are still being developed. If you've been in cybersecurity for any amount of time, you probably know what Zeus is. Gaussium at the bottom there is actually a variant of Zeus. GOZ actually stands for Game Over Zeus, and Neum it's basically new Game Over Zeus, and it's spreading around now. Dridex is another type of banking Trojan. Spreads by the same methods, web drive-by, spam, etc., and just gets its information out a different way through HTML injection. But yeah, you'll run into these frequently, and they're all kind of defined by their goal, which is just to steal your financial information. So malicious exploits to the Heartbleed vulnerability. Heartbleed is a vulnerability in SSL cryptographic software, and the reason this is important and the reason we need to address some of these bigger vulnerabilities that have been made or released recently is because they involve technology that is really central to the way the internet works. SSL encryption is kind of the asymmetric backbone on which a lot of the e-commerce is built in the internet, and if you can exploit it, it's extremely dangerous to do any sort of financial transactions online. This was actually released, I believe, last year, and a lot of patches are already out for it, but again, you run into the danger that people aren't patching for this necessarily. So if you're worried and if you're using a system that isn't well maintained, make sure you check your systems, ask your network administrator or whoever it is what's vulnerable and what's not. So another one that's really cool, we addressed this earlier too, shell shock is a Unix vulnerability that lets you basically get into the Unix bash shell, which is root access for all intents and purposes. Your Mac, if you have a Mac, it operates at its core on Unix, and it was or is vulnerable to shell shock. And a lot of important network computers, like web servers and other things, are vulnerable to shell shock because they have a Unix backend in there somewhere. So that's just another kind of cool vulnerability that's popped up recently. So what is denial of service? Denial of service attacks are DDoS attacks. DDoS is distributed denial of service, is the use of information systems to make another machine or network connected to the internet unavailable for its intended purpose. So it basically either overloads it with information or sends it specific types of information that for some reason make that system unavailable for whatever it was designed to do. So denial of service, they're getting pretty sophisticated. And one of the things that have really come to the forefront, especially since I was in university and stuff, is the idea of denial of service and the amplification of the attack. So amplification attacks exploit some network protocol by recursively querying resources and altering the network response onto the victim network. So one of the best documented ways they do this is via DNS, and they would ask open DNS servers a certain set of instructions, and the open DNS server would in turn give those instructions back, but it was also being directed to direct that traffic to the victim network or system. So it lets attackers amplify their traffic because they can make use of this open system of DNS that has or still does sort of exist online. And they've actually shifted away from DNS because after DNS amplification became a big thing, people started getting worried that there were all these DNS servers open and available for attackers to use for amplification attacks. So they went through, shut them down, and attackers have found a new victim, which are network time or NTP servers. And these are now being used in place of DNS servers in many instances. So the second kind of attack with botnets and denial of service is really just the brute force attack, sending as much traffic as you can against any system or network to try and bring it down. It doesn't need to require any necessarily fancy amplification if you have enough bots. You just need the botnet and a lot of bandwidth coming from the botnet to your target. And remember, just because an attack is using a botnet does not make it a brute force attack. Attackers are pretty good at this stuff, and not only will they maintain their botnet, they will also use it to launch amplification attacks, which is how you get some pretty crazy gigabyte per second attacks launched against people. I believe it was in 2013, there was large amplification attacks launched against the financial institutions in the United States. Smurf attack is just an example of kind of a basic brute force attack. It's actually a pretty old example, but kind of the original. And Spamhaus and Cloudfire are two of the more recent attack examples. Spamhaus, dedicated to fighting against spam and kind of diametrically opposed to people that run botnets, had a large NTP amplification attack launched against it by a botnet and all those open NTP servers, which Cloudflare helped stop. Later, Cloudflare was also attacked by those, maybe not the same spammers and group of botnet holders, but it was attacked by some segment of botnet holders and amplification attack users.